Welcome to the Salt Lake City Planning Commission. Today's date is Wednesday, May 8th, 2024. The Planning Commission consists of residents from each Salt Lake City district that are appointed in a manner providing balanced geographic, professional, neighborhood, and community interest representation. The Planning Commission reviews and acts on any changes to the city's general plans, small area plans, special studies, zoning ordinances, and zoning district maps. The Commission also reviews and acts on planned unit developments, conditional uses, and certain subdivisions. Our goal is to provide a welcoming and safe environment for everyone. We ask that those in attendance adhere to a few ground rules. 1, silence or turn off your cell phones. 2, respect the person speaking and do not interrupt or do other things that could intimidate or deter others from exercising their right to be heard. Clapping, cheering, jeering, shouting, or other actions used to discourage people who have different opinions from participating will not. People who attempt to diminish someone else's input may be removed from the room. 3, if you wish to speak, come to the microphone once the public hearing has been opened and state your name. Members of the public will have 2 minutes to comment. Your time cannot be combined with someone else's time. Everyone will get the same amount of time to speak so that we can ensure everyone is treated equally. If you are a representative of an officially registered, recognized organization and the item you wish to speak on is within the boundaries of your organization, you will be given 5 minutes. If it is outside of your boundaries, you will be given 2 minutes. 4, if you have a handout that you want the commission to see, you need to leave copies because they become part of the legal record. 5, when commenting, speak clearly, keep your comments on topic and brief. 6, questions asked during a public hearing will not be answered during the public hearing. Rather, the commission may ask the applicant or staff to answer questions after the public hearing is closed, or ask city staff to follow up with you at a later time. First off, we don't have meetings ready yet from our last meeting, so we will go ahead and skip the approval of the meeting minutes and move on to the report of the chair and vice chair. The chair has nothing to report.
Well, good evening, everyone. So the vice chair has something to report. I will be relocating out of state, and unfortunately that means that I might have to step down. This will not be my last commission. It will be the upcoming one, the 22nd. But I just wanted to say, it's been an honor and a privilege to serve District 3 and everyone who has called Salt Lake City home. This is a very resilient community who welcomed me in 2020 when there was an earthquake and a windstorm and whatnot. And throughout my years, involved in planning and resilience effort from the Rocky Mountain region, specifically here in Utah, it's been just extremely rewarding to be part of that process. And one of my major highlights and ultimate highlights from Salt Lake City in Utah overall has been serving in this planning commission. So I wish the commission the best. I think you guys are in good hands. These are excellent colleagues who I admire and have high, respect. So with that, that's my report for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Santos Rivera. And that also means that we need to remember to put election of a vice chair on our next agenda. The report of the director.
Thank you. Commissioner Rivera is humbly not stating why he's relocating out of state, but I'll congratulate him on being accepted to a PhD program at Texas A&M University. So that's no small feat. And we're super happy for you in that endeavor. So
thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Last night, the City Council had several planning related items on their formal meeting. They also talked about I guess what's now being called the Sports, Entertainment, Culture, and Convention District. They heard a briefing from Smith Entertainment Group on that it's probably worth watching if you didn't watch it, but you can pull those up on the city council and the city's YouTube page. But they had some big items on their regular agenda. They had public hearings for the ballpark stationary zoning changes, which is a big thing and part of our zoning consolidation endeavors. They also had a public hearing on the North Point area annexation. So this is a city-initiated annexation along 2200 West. For those that remember the North Point plan when it was coming through, the city boundary in that area, there's several islands and peninsulas of unincorporated land, so that annexation cleans all of that up. So they close that public hearing, and it'll go through the process. Eventually, they'll make that decision. Probably, I would think it's probably in the next few months where they'll make a decision to actually approve that annexation. Through an annexation, the city council is required by state code to apply a zoning to all of the land. It can be different zoning districts, but the council, when they adopted the North Point plan, adopted a policy that land annexed in will, the preference is to have it be annexed in as AG2. This might have some changes, some different zones, because some of the land that's in the county is already zoned for manufacturing uses and has actually manufacturing uses on it. So we're not quite sure what that's going to mean for us, but I just wanted to give you an update on that. It's a different zoning process than what you're used to. Those things aren't required to come to the planning commission, but the council can ask for planning commission input. They have yet to do that, but my guess is that they'll probably follow the plan that they recently adopted. So there's also a couple of map amendments that were adopted. One was the city-owned property on 1300 South, and I think it was right around 1000 West, right along the Jordan River. That was going from R15 to RMF 30. So, that better not start. Sorry. So hopefully there's, the intent is for the city to build some for sale residential dwellings on that property that may be a variety of different housing types, but also I believe to hopefully keep that land in the housing trust fund to make sure that they're affordable long term. And then a couple of other smaller zoning map amendments were adopted, and I think that is about it on that report.
Thank you. We will move to our open forum. If any of the commissioners have anything they would like to discuss.
I have a couple of questions about things that I've read about or heard about lately concerning housing. And one is whether our rules allow bedrooms without windows. Maybe these are questions that this meeting could have been an email, but I wonder if we allow bedrooms without windows. I didn't think anyone in the world did, but some cities do, and I wonder if we do. And also if we allow single stair buildings.
Yeah, so both of those things in Utah are regulated by the building code. So the city has very limited ability to modify the building code because it is adopted by the state legislature, and we have to use whatever code the state legislature adopts. I'm not sure if there is a provision in there that deals with flexibility on windowless bedrooms. Particularly, I'm assuming that's typically for like high-rise buildings and things above where windows are used for emergency egress and things like that, where they serve a different purpose than they do in lower scale buildings. And I don't believe that the single stair is allowed in the building code that the state has adopted. We're happy to check with our building services and our building official to get some more concrete answers for you.
Sure, thanks.
I do have a general question to ask staff, and that is, it's about general plans and also about specific neighborhood plans later on. And this is the reason I want to ask it now, is that this is sort of, it has to do with a question that's on our agenda, but it's also just for the future planning. We have, we make when we make a zoning recommendation to the city council, I know that they have a lot of discretion to toss it out or do whatever they want with it, based on whatever they're thinking that day. But do we have a lot of discretion in terms of making a recommendation about zoning? Or is it more that we have to follow the plans that are in place? Or do we have to, do we have to follow the plan? So if something conflicts, for example, with Plan Salt Lake, or it conflicts with, are we required to then say, no, I'm sorry, it conflicts with Plan Salt Lake, and send that on to city council with our recommendation? Or do we have discretion to go ahead and approve it?
You have discretion. So under the factors for considering zoning changes, the code says that those are factors to consider. Right. A proposal doesn't need to meet all of those, or frankly, any of them. Ideally, they should meet at least one, right? But you have some discretion on what you recommend to the city council. Depending on the scope of it, you wouldn't necessarily have the discretion, for example, to add land that hasn't been noticed into a zoning change.
Right.
But
okay.
but you have pretty broad discretion.
So do you think that, I mean, again, this is sort of more general, when something like that is not recommended to city council? I mean, if for example, let's not talk about the project today, but some other project some other thing came before us where somebody wanted to rezone a bunch of land in, I don't know, Sugar House, and we turned it, we said no and sent that negative recommendation off. Do we have to have a good reason to say no?
It's helpful to have at least some reason. I mean, I guess whether it's good or not. But I mean,
by a good reason, I mean a reason that's accountable to the actual to Plan Salt Lake, or does make sense, or that has some background in a plan. Or can we just be real arbitrary? Not real arbitrary, but sort of arbitrary.
Well, I think there is. Well, first, I'm going to say there are some situations where, for example, like public uses, things that are using public dollars and stuff, they're required to conform to the general plan. So they have to be authorized by the plan before money can be spent for them. So that's one situation. But there's also situations where no plan can account for everything that might come up, especially after 10 or 15 years. So that's why there's factors that talk about, what are current best practices, what are current needs, things like that. And sometimes that can be contrary to what the plan actually says. I'll give you a perfect example. In one of our plans, it talks about commercial uses being converted back to residential uses. Well, that's probably not what anyone actually wants in this point in time, right? And these aren't just like random properties. These are like commercial districts. So that conflicts with a number of other policies the city may have. So it really kind of depends on the situation. But yeah, there will be some times where a proposal just isn't consistent with what is in the plan, but current best practices may suggest going a different direction.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go ahead and move on to the regular agenda to our first item. America First Credit Union zoning map amendment, zoning text amendment, and plan development at approximately 455 East and 475 East, 500 South. Case numbers PLN PCM 2022-0115. Case number PLN PCM 2023-00763, and case number PLN PCM 2023-00745. And our planner is Amanda Roman.
Thank you. All right. I will not repeat those numbers since there's a so there's a handful of them. So this presentation will be on 3 different petitions for the America First property at 455 East and 475 East, 500 South. They are proposing a zoning map amendment, a text amendment, and a plan development. The zoning map amendment is, they are requesting to rezone both properties from RMU 45, which is a residential mixed-use zone, to RO, which is a residential office. The text amendment would add financial institution with a drive-through facility as a permitted use in the RO district. And they have provided a footnote that would limit the boundaries of the use. And then, presuming that the zoning map amendment is adopted, they are also requesting plan development approval to build a parking structure on the larger site, which is 455 East, 500 South, to build a parking structure under the RO standards, but with reduced rear yard, corner side yard, and interior side yard setbacks. So there's the 2 properties. The larger one is where the existing America First Credit Union branch is located. The site also has a existing drive-through facility with 3 teller lanes and an ATM lane and an existing parking structure. The provided parking on site as of today is 147 stalls within the structure and 23 surface stalls. The background of this petition is that the structure is currently in disrepair, and they would like to rebuild it to accommodate the parking needs on site for their office spaces. The second property, which we include in the rezone but is not proposed to be redeveloped, is 475 East, 500 South. The existing uses are an office building and surface parking. The site provides 11 surface stalls. So there's existing property limitations, which is the driver of these petitions. So the properties have always been zoned for multifamily and limited office uses. Changes to the zoning map in 2012 rendered the parking structure non-compliant and the drive-through to a non-conforming use. The zoning map was changed from RO, residential office, to RMU 45 in 2012 as a part of the 400 South Livable Communities project, which was implementing the TSA zoning along 400 South. As for the parking structure, the existing non-complying parking structure could be rebuilt under our non-compliant structure section of code. And then the non-complying use, drive-throughs are not currently permitted in the RMU 45 district or the RO district that they're proposing. So under the non-compliant use section of code, a non-conforming use can continue until abandoned or voluntarily removed. The code also allows some minor modifications. So the first petition is the zoning map amendment to rezone both properties from RMU 45 to RO. The rezone would facilitate the construction of a taller parking structure than what is allowed under the current zoning. The parking structure is proposed to be 52 feet in height, 5 levels, and provide 197 stalls. Here's the subject property. The AFCU building is the top left. The other office building is the top right and bottom left. And some more site photos. The buildings along 500 East they are zoned RMU 45, and then the taller building in the background of the photo is a TSA UNC zoning district. And then buildings on the south side of 500 South, the zoning here varies as well. So the credit union across the street is zone CN. Their drive-through is actually a non-conforming use as well. Then you see RMF 75 zoning as well as RO zoning on the south side of 500 South. So standards of approval for zoning map amendments, we look for consistency with adopted plans, Plan Salt Lake and Central Community Plan in this case, whether it furthers the purpose of the zoning district and applicable overlays. This property is right outside of the Central City Historic District, so there's not an overlay. Potential impacts on adjacent properties and adequacy of public facilities. The RO district is intended to provide a suitable environment for a combination of residential and office uses. The standards encourage the conversion of historic structures to office uses. An example of that is actually directly north of the subject property. There is a historic site, local landmark that has been converted to office uses. As I mentioned before, both properties were rezoned in 2012 from RO. And then the RO district, so the maximum height in the RO district is 60 feet, unless it's adjacent to a district that allows taller buildings than 60 feet. Then the height allowance increases to 90 feet. So the larger site where the AFCU building is located is surrounded by TSA UNC zoning. That zone has a maximum height of 75 feet. So therefore, construction on that piece of property could go up to 90 feet. The smaller property abuts the RMU 45 zone, so the building height is limited to 60 feet if it were to redevelop. Another point that I wanted to make about the RO zoning district there's no design standards associated with this zoning district. There are design standards with a lot of design standards with TSA, as well as the RMU 45, which are shown here. So the current zoning district allows for 45 feet for residential uses, up to 55 with a design review. But it only allows 20 feet of building height for non-residential uses, which is what this property currently is. The highlighted text, so the existing parking structure is non-compliant as to height, and the existing rear yard setback also does not meet the current zoning standards under the RMU 45 zoning district. Back to the design standards, the current zoning district has standards related to ground floor use, building material, glass, entrances, blank walls, and step backs. Both zones have different standards, whether it's residential development. The RO zone has standards for buildings on lots less than 20,000 square feet and more than 20,000 square feet. So I just took the zoning standards that's applicable to this property and the uses as proposed. Like I mentioned before, the RO zone has a height limit of 60 feet unless it abuts a district with a greater maximum height. Then it increases to 90 feet. I have the building coverage, and then the front and corner yard setbacks are 25 feet with an interior side yard of 15 feet. And there are no design standards associated with this zone. Text amendment. So the text amendment would add financial institutions with a drive-through facility as a permitted use in the zone. A financial institution is a permitted use. It just doesn't allow that drive-through component. So the purpose of the text amendment would change the non-conforming drive-through to a conforming use. More pictures of the site with a drive-through. This site has a lot of driveway access points. This is showing driveways number 4 and 5. So the standards of approval for text amendments, we consider the consistency with adopted plans, whether it furthers the purpose of the zoning ordinance and applicable overlays, and then also the extent to which the amendment implements best current professional practices of urban planning and design. Some considerations for the text amendment. So they're proposing to limit this drive-through use to 500 and 600 South between 700 East and I-15. So looking at the zoning district, all of the RO properties within this boundary are on the screen. There's not too many of them. The subject property would be the only property within this boundary to benefit from the proposed text amendment. There are existing other financial institutions in the area. There's some both north and south, but they're not zoned RO, and they're also non-conforming uses. So reviewing compatibility impacts. So as for the zoning map amendment, there have not been any policy changes to support rezoning from a mixed-use pedestrian-oriented district back to the RO district. The current proposal is to build a parking structure that's 52 feet in height, but if rezoned, if the property is sold, redeveloped by a different owner, the maximum height at this location is 90 feet. The text amendment, while drive-throughs do offer accessible services, they don't align with the city's overall goals of enhancing a pedestrian-oriented development. And then when reviewing these, the purpose statement for general amendments is they're not intended to relieve particular hardships nor confer special privileges or rights upon any person, but only to make adjustments necessary in light of changed conditions or changes in public policy. And while we're reviewing this, the rezone and text amendment are a bit contradictory. The rezone supports this increase in parking to build this parking structure, taller building heights, and allowing people to drive to the site and exit their cars. The drive-through, on the other hand, supports people staying in their vehicles. And then another thing just to consider, which we won't review now, as Nick mentioned, we are working on a zoning consolidation, consolidating our commercial districts into form-based zones, and both the RMU 45 and RO districts are going to be consolidated. So reviewing the Central Community Plan, so the future land use map designates this site as residential office mixed use. So the proposal does align with the Central Community Plan. With the plan's goals, the overall plan goals are to create livable neighborhoods, sustainable commerce, unique and active public spaces, and pedestrian mobility and accessibility. So while the proposed zoning map amendment does align with the future land use designation, it does not adequately address the community plan's plan goals as shown here. In the Central Community Plan, one of the main topics and issues with the Central City is streets and circulation. So the plan aims to encourage residents' ability to minimize the use of private automobiles by providing services for residents within walking distance of the homes. Additionally, the subject properties are in close proximity to the trolley station. It is less than a quarter mile away, the trolley track station. And they were rezoned in 2012 to support the TSA zoning district along 400 South, where development efforts include infill projects and the revitalization of underutilized spaces. Development goals in this area prioritize enhancing bicycle routes, promoting connectivity between different parts of the neighborhood. With Plan Salt Lake, these are the initiatives that I pulled that are applicable to this project. So the initiatives in Plan Salt Lake do support neighborhood business districts as they provide essential services and amenities, which, a financial institution is an essential service. On the other hand, drive-through facilities have more of an impact on neighborhoods and do run contrary to many of the sustainability, placemaking, and pedestrian-oriented initiatives and plans within the city. For the transportation section, the plan states that automobile dependency increases air pollution and traffic and encourages development that is designed for cars, not people. And one of the transportation and mobility initiatives is to reduce automobile dependency and single occupancy vehicle trips. So permitting more automobile-dependent uses, such as drive-through facilities and large parking structures that support more drivers, does contradict these objectives and may contribute to increased air pollution and traffic congestion. And then for the beautiful city, so one of the initiatives under this goal is to support and encourage architecture development and infrastructure that is people-focused. Amending the ordinance to prioritize convenient use of vehicles does not encourage development that is people-focused. And then also rezoning to a district without design standards and amending the code to permit drive-throughs does not support the overall goals, development goals of the neighborhood within Central City and downtown. And then finally, for the economic portion of Plan Salt Lake. So while the subject properties are not zoned TSA, they are surrounded by that zoning district, which is designed to support high-density residential developments. Recommending denial of the text amendment permitting drive-through facilities along 500 and 600 South is not expected to have an adverse impact on the current operations of existing businesses, as many of them already operate as non-conforming uses. And then, as I mentioned before, the existing parking structure could be rebuilt under the non-complying structure standards. And it does provide more parking than required in the existing or proposed zoning districts. On to the plan development application. So the standards of approval for a plan development, they The project must meet the purpose statement of a plan development, achieve at least one of the required objectives. The project must demonstrate why modifications are necessary and result in a more enhanced product than would be achievable under strict application of the zoning standards. As we review this, it's going to be reviewed under the RO standards, presuming that the district is adopted. So there's a few potential outcomes of the meeting today. So the commission may recommend approval or denial of the rezone, but deny the plan development if they find that the plan development doesn't meet the standards of 21A 55. And so then if the council does adopt the rezone, the applicant could then either develop the property under the RO standards, they could wait a year to reapply for a plan development through this process, or they could ask that the council enter into a development agreement. And then the other outcome is the commission may recommend approval of the rezone and also the plan development, but if the city council does not adopt the rezone, then the plan development would be null and void as well. So the request for the plan development is for a reduction of setbacks for a 5-level, 52-foot high parking structure. It's linked to the existing 5-story AFCU office building via a pedestrian sky bridge on the 2nd level. The requested modifications are a reduction of the rear yard setback from 30 feet to 15, reduction of the corner side yard setback from 25 to 15 feet, and a reduction of the interior side yard setback from 15 to 5 feet. The applicant states that the project meets the master plan implementation objective. Here's some photos from Denver Street, which is on the western side of the property. You see the AFCU building on the top left, the parking garage structure top right, as well as the bottom of the screen, and then the buildings on the bottom right are within the TSA zoning district. AFCU currently uses this parking lot for their employees because the current structure is dilapidated. And then here are some photos of the parking structure as well as the existing sky bridge. And then on Denver Street, there's 3 access points, numbers 6 through 8. So the site plan, I try to draw it out for you. So the light orange are existing curb cuts. If the plan development is approved, planning staff is recommending closing the curb cut that's in purple. It is blocked by bollards currently and is not in use, and the applicant did agree to this condition of approval. The blue is the sky bridge. It's existing, and they're proposing to keep it as is. And then as the drive-through location is also shown, they are not proposing to make modifications to the drive-through other than changing the direction. So instead of vehicles entering from 500 South, they'll go to Denver Street and then wrap around back to 500 South. I do want to make a point that right now the circulation is there's driveway access from 500 East through the smaller property, and when drivers cross over into the America First property, they take a right and they go through the drive-through. As proposed with the change in direction, that access won't be used the same way because they won't be able to turn right. They'll have to go back around to 500 South through Denver Street. So to touch on parking, which is really the crux of this petition. So the existing RMU 45 zone is in the neighborhood parking context. It includes zones with pedestrian scale development, patterns, building forms, and amenities. The parking requirement is 2 stalls for 1,000 square feet for both financial institutions and office uses, and then it has a maximum of 3 stalls. The proposed RO zone is in the general parking context, so it's a broader context. The zoning districts tend to be more auto-dependent. The parking requirement for this zone is 2 stalls for financial institutions and 3 for office uses with a maximum of 4. So on site now, the provided parking, this includes the structure that's not being used, and it includes both pieces of both land. So the existing parking provided is 181 stalls. Across both properties, they're proposing 227 stalls. 197 of them would be within the parking structure. Both the existing and the proposed parking surpass the minimum number of stalls. It does meet code, and it's just under the maximum number of stalls permitted. I do want to touch on that. Our parking code, while we do have maximums, we do not apply the maximum if parking is located within a structure. This is because the zoning district with its height, bulk regulations, setbacks really determines that the size of the structure. So while I do have the maximum number of stalls, even if they had more than that, it wouldn't apply because it's in a structure. And then the map on the bottom is just demonstrating how close the parcels are to the trolley track station. So under staff analysis, so the applicant is stating that the project achieves the master plan implementation objective by supporting the transportation and economic development portions of the central community plan. So staff, and much more details are in your staff report, but staff finds that the request to reduce setbacks to facilitate the construction of this structure does not fulfill that objective. While the project aims to address parking needs, the proposal does not demonstrate innovative or alternative approaches to property design, and the increased parking does not provide an overall benefit to the community as outlined in the plan development objectives. The proposed setback reductions do not result in a more enhanced product, and staff has not found that evidence has been presented that demonstrates that the proposed modifications are necessary to meet the purpose of a plan development or necessary to utilize the property as intended in the RO zoning district. So therefore, planning staff is recommending denial of, is recommending the Planning Commission forward recommendation of denial to the City Council for both the planning map amendment and the text amendment. And then we are also recommending the Planning Commission deny the plan development petition. If the plan development is approved, then the approval is contingent on the rezone being adopted. It's not contingent on the text amendment. If the text amendment is not adopted, business can continue as usual as long as they don't change that drive-through. And then if the plan development was to be approved, staff has recommended the condition to close that easternmost curb cut. Thank you. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Let's go ahead and have the applicant come forward.
And I have a presentation for them as well.
And remember to state your name for the record.
Yeah, my name is Jay Tate.
Make sure the blue light's on,
Green light. Yeah, got it.
or green light, excuse me.
My name is Jake Tate. I'm with AWA. I'm a consulting civil engineer. I represent America First Credit Union. I've been working with them for over 10 years. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I wanted to just give a quick background on America First. Do you have a clicker?
Do you want to switch me?
Sure.
That would probably be easier.
All right.
Do your slides.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So America First has occupied this space for almost 40 years, 38 years. They were here when the building was built in 1985, and they've been operating the credit union and drive-through since then. When the building came up for sale in 2012, they decided to purchase it because they liked the area, they liked being down here in downtown, and they wanted to continue their presence here as a financial institution. As an institution, they're the 5th largest credit union in the country as far as membership goes. They have 1.3 million members across the Wasatch Front from Idaho to Arizona and into Nevada. So they definitely want to be part of our community, and they want to bring the power and the influence that they have to Salt Lake City. They support all of our local sporting events. They're represent the University of Utah. They sponsor the Jazz. I mean, they're an integral member of our community, and especially here in Salt Lake City. And the one thing that we wanted to get into is the 8th largest credit union as far as assets go, but they're 5th as far as membership. The credit union purchased the property in 2012, and they currently serve 23,500 members here in the Salt Lake. That branch itself has 23,500 members.
So,
Every month.
sorry, would you mind just moving the mic a little closer? You can slide the whole thing closer. I'm just hard of hearing.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Thank you.
They have 23,500 members that use this branch at least once a year, and actively they have almost 12,000 that use it monthly or bi-monthly, and then they almost have 11,000 transactions every month. So it's a busy branch. They get a lot of service here. And one of the reasons why this whole instance came up, and I guess I'd like to start into the history of this by kind of giving you the 4 words that we came in with, is we need your help. Right? This whole thing was triggered when we, in 2022, we had a structural engineer come in and look at the problems, and I have some photos of the parking structure I'll share with you here in a moment. But upon the recommendations that we received from the structural engineer, we closed that parking structure, and we have not used it since 2022. And we immediately set up a meeting with the planning department because we knew we needed to replace this parking structure, and a lot of the recommendations that are before you today are a result of those discussions that we've had with planning. It's evolved over the 2 years since we came in. Amanda's our 4th planner we've been working with, so opinions have changed and zoning recommendations have changed as we've kind of evolved through this process. And we felt that the staff felt that RO, and I say staff, I believe it was one of your predecessors, so that RO was the best zone for us to pursue, because not only was it the previous zone, but the only requirement that for a variance or our development review would be these setbacks. We didn't have to ask for height, we didn't have to ask for anything else, lowering the parking or raising the parking number, everything fit but the setbacks. And those setbacks are mainly a concern because of the narrow nature of the property there. It's just the constraints of the property. So the existing building is currently about 30 to 40% leased. The parking stalls that were shown across the street, America First has to lease 88 stalls from that parking structure because they don't have parking for just the 30% of the building that's leased. So they're paying monthly every single month, and the problem there too is they're on a month to month. They don't control their fate there. So if that parking entity decides that they don't want them to lease parking stalls in there, we'll have 23 parking stalls for 55,000 square feet. And that's why we're here, to try and get this parking structure, to find a way to make it work. We just want to be able to use the building that we own. So here are some pictures of the parking structure. Right here you can see the age of the deck, water comes in through the joints. You can see it the concrete starting to wear away. Down on the main floor, now the main floor, it's kind of partially underground. It goes down a half level. That has been closed longer than 2022 because there's standing water in there from groundwater. That's what you're seeing there in the bottom. It's usually full of water, and it's just, we'd have to put in a new dewatering system, and that's just not feasible with the existing. On the right-hand side, you see there's a beam there that's literally, the water that's in there creates a moist environment, and that just eats through the rebar that's in the concrete. And as the rebar gets rusty, it expands, and it starts popping the concrete. And you can see, right here, you can see that the beams are starting to crack and break. Some more pictures. This is the stairwell in the bottom floor that's consistently full of water. You can see the door is rusting out because it's always wet in that area. Here's one of the main beams, the support beams on the second deck. You can see that it's cracking, the weight of it's cracking the beam underneath it. And then here, this is a vertical member that goes up, and you can see there's cracks down the vertical member. And when we had the structural analysis come in and the engineer gave his recommendations, that's when we shut it down. We can't occupy this. America First's main concern is their employees and their members, period. I realize that with the community plan and everything that we talked about, a lot of it is, it doesn't benefit the community, there's no outside, and I get it. But our concern is the safety of our members and of our employees. So our proposal, and you can see here, it was mentioned that the RO zone doesn't have any design standards, which, as you can see from the parking structure that we put in front of you, I believe we've gone above and beyond what a standard parking structure design would be. There's glass stair towers, there's coverings. The covering that you see there is similar to the one down at Harmon's. It would be like a metal perforated covering that it reduces the amount of glare that comes out of there. That was specifically done to help the neighbors next to us so there wasn't as much glare going out of those parking structures. We wanted to try and be sensitive to them and reduce it as much as possible. We've also pulled it from 4 feet currently to 15 feet. As we mentioned, that still doesn't meet the requirement, but we pulled it back to get it away from those housing units as well. We tried to give as much space as we could. But the main thing here is America First has been here for 40 years, and they're ready to spend upwards of $25 million to revitalize this site and this parking structure so they can be here for another 40 years. I realize zoning looks for multifamily and a lot of other uses, but they're not so concerned about that specifically because they plan on being the person that's here for 40 years. And they're ready to make a financial investment to do that, to not only make the building look revitalized and new, but to provide this parking structure that provides safe and accessible access for their employees and their members. One thing that was mentioned, sustainability was talked about, and how reducing the amount of vehicle traffic will reduce the carbon footprint. I 100% agree with that. One thing that wasn't mentioned at all, I didn't see in the entire report, was that we are proposing putting solar panels up that will reduce our electrical usage up to 60% on top of the structure. That does two things for us. One, we put a roof on top, so that keeps water from coming in and will help extend the longevity of the parking structure, but it also gives us the opportunity to install those south-facing photovoltaic cells, and allows us to kind of recapture some of that carbon footprint to help our sustainability, because we acknowledge cars pollute, we all know that, but at the end of the day, we cannot lease our space because we don't have enough parking. People won't sign a lease with America First because they require, I want this many stalls for my employees, and if we can't guarantee them that, they go somewhere else. And a vacant building doesn't benefit anyone. It doesn't benefit the city, it doesn't benefit the owner. It truly is wasting space, and America First wants to be here. That's why they bought the building in 2012. So as you can see here, this is just a close-up of the building. The blue mesh, we've tried to make it as nice as possible. It doesn't necessarily feel like a big concrete box that's sitting there. It's screened as much as we can. The glass on the sides, it could be misconstrued for an office building, frankly, because we tried to make it nice. We didn't want it to feel like a dark corner. We didn't want it to be an uninviting place. We wanted it to feel modern and progressive, like America First's vision and the things that they do. So I guess to go into the zoning map amendment, as mentioned by staff, it was rezoned by the city from RO back in 2012. So what we're trying to do is go back to that zone, and to be able to, like I mentioned earlier, to make fit as many of the requirements as possible other than those setbacks. The growth of small businesses, so there are a couple of ways that we can improve the community, and part of it is the zoning requirements, but also bringing new businesses. This building can hold up to 200 or 300 jobs that aren't currently there. That's 200 or 300 people walking for lunch to 4 South and visiting those businesses, going to Trader Joe's and getting some food before they go back to home for the day. We are providing 20 stalls for bikes inside the parking structure, lockable, secure areas to kind of induce those people who live closer to bike. We would love that. But we can't necessarily control who we lease it to, and those people have employees from all over the valley. Hundreds of thousands of people commute to Salt Lake City every day for work, and we need to be able to provide them a place to park their cars if they choose to use their vehicle. On the text amendment, so the text amendment is intended to kind of narrow down that. It was the previous staff's recommendation, to limit that to the vehicle corridor of 5th and 6th South. I know we don't want to talk about vehicles, we don't want to talk about cars, but the fact of the matter is 5th and 6th South are basically the transportation arteries of Salt Lake City. That's where all the vehicles come to and from, and being on that road naturally leads us to be a auto-centric business or location. It may not cohesively go with the city plan, but the fact of the matter is I don't know that that's changing anytime soon. And it's classified as a grand boulevard in the city's topology map, and I think that's something that should be considered. Now, from the Wasatch Front Regional Council, as an engineer, this is something we look at when we look at plans. These are actual numbers of what the average daily trips are on 5th and 6th South. And you can see there's almost 90,000 trips per day that come in and out of 5th and 6th South each day. And our site over here, you'll see that on 5th South, there's 19,000 vehicles per day. There's 25,000 vehicles a day on 4th and 21 on 6th. So just around our site, there's only almost 50,000 vehicle trips per day around our site. So we want to do whatever we can to reduce that, but at the same time, we need to provide a safe parking location for our employees. Those trips numbers are only going up in the future, and that's exactly why the city is focusing on transportation and multi-transit options of how to get people in and out of here. And America First is happy to provide bus passes for those who decide to use it for their employees. But again, they're only a small part of this building, even though they own it. They'll probably occupy 1 to 1.5 floors of the 5-story building. So, do I have a couple more minutes, do you think? Are we good? Okay, I think I've got a couple minutes. I'll try to keep it short. So, as mentioned before, it was mentioned that we could rezone to RO and then just go by the RO requirements. So we said, okay, let's see what that looks like. And this red square here is what the parking structure would look like if it met the standards and we didn't have to ask for that development waiver. And when you lay that out and you draw it up, that structure would need to be 9 stories tall to get the same amount of parking that we have in our 5-story building, which exceeds that 90 feet limitation by probably 10 or 12 feet. So why I do agree, yes, it can be done. Is it feasible? No, it doesn't make sense to put a 9-story parking structure here. And that's why we're asking for that setback reduction. So currently, the site has 23 stalls. The minimum per code is, if we did go to the RO zone, would be 177, as was mentioned. We're 80% underparked on site currently, 86.5%. The proposed structure is less than the maximum, and it fits within the minimum and maximum, so it meets code. And we would be under that 60-foot natural height restriction or the 90-foot, obviously, if we take the adjacent zones into consideration. So we wanted to try to figure out, can we do it here with the setbacks and not have to ask for that development waiver? And I just don't see how we could do that without putting a pillar up in the sky. So just a few final things and thoughts as we go through the plan development purpose. America First is not a developer. They're not developing this to flip. We're trying to solve a problem that we have. And the footprint of the new parking structure is the exact same size as the existing parking structure. We're not increasing the building footprint on the site. We're adding the photovoltaic cells, and we're trying to increase our connectability and keep it substantially connected is what previous staff has determined with that sky bridge. It makes it substantially connected to the building, and revitalizing the area and updating the colors and materials. So there's a lot of options here, and we could go through. I don't know that there's anything specifically that we haven't talked about here. And if you read, if you've read the staff report, it doesn't feel like we're on the same page as the staff. So that's why we're here, is to kind of ask for your help and how can we get through this to the next step? Because again, we've got a problem. The parking structure is collapsing, falling apart, cracking. We need to have parking for our employees. How can we meet and how can we get this done? We're not looking to flip this property. We're not looking to do anything but rebuild a parking structure that's the same footprint, slid back away from the residentials next to us, and just trying to keep that as efficient as we can. I think that's probably it for us. I probably exceeded my time, so thank you for humoring me on that. But any questions from staff? We're here.
I have a question for staff. Just want to clarify whether the applicant, if they wanted to demolish and replace the existing parking structure, could they do that and build one of the same basic scale of what's already there?
Yes, they could. I haven't gone into the site plan or anything like that, but we do have a non-complying structure section of code to address this type of situation.
Thanks. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing on this item. If there's anyone from the public who would like to give comment, go ahead and approach the microphone.
Excuse me. My name is Mike George. I'm a property owner directly across the street from this project on Fifth South. My main concerns, I didn't hear a lot of the presentation, I apologize. So, I'm concerned about parking, not just parking, just traffic in general on Denver Street. I own the two properties right there on the corner of Denver and Fifth, and then the triplex right next door, where they're building the big, the Shaw. And Shaw's been really good to deal with. They've caused damage to my driveway. They replaced it, sprinklers, all that kind of stuff, but they've been very good to work with. The city, I want to plug for Salt Lake City Stormwater team. I know them very well. They've been on top of it. Been very good, no complaints there. But Denver Street is basically a one-way street now. I'm really concerned with, even though they have adequate parking, I know this is a separate project, but Denver Street between 5th and 6th, I think is going to be people getting off, 6 South off the freeway could use Denver Street to access this property because it's kind of a straight shot rather than going to 5th East. So those are my concerns. Snow removal is another one. I don't know where they're going to, without widening Denver Street, I don't know how they're really going to do it. So that's all I had.
Thank you. Anyone else? Have we received any emails?
We have not received any emails.
We will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and
Okay, well, then I'm confused why you didn't bring up why you're choosing not to rebuild under the non-conforming structure that would allow you to tear it down and rebuild it as you wish. So why do you need a rezone if you can do it that way?
Yeah, so when it comes to development, one of the most expensive options is a parking structure of any type of construction. So to invest, to give you an idea, the investment for this parking structure is in the vicinity of probably $15 million. So if you're gonna, and the issue, one of the issues is here is it does go down underground, which we're gonna try and reduce as much as we can. And so if you take out those parking stalls on the lower level, which are inundated, as you can see on the photo, that 143 goes down to 100 already just by one lifting it up. And then it's done in an interesting way. It's actually like a corkscrew where you park on every part of the deck as it goes up instead of having like a level deck and then you go up into the next, there's a ramp to go up to the next one. So to build it as is, we would basically only get about 100 stalls back for our $10 million investment. And America First, being, their members' funds, they want to be as upright as they can and get as much as they can for their dollar. And that's kind of why we would want to get enough. We don't want to spend all this money and get half the stalls that we need. If we're going to put a huge investment into a parking structure, we'd like to make sure that it's enough to make the property developable and be able to utilize the building as it is. Because if we only got 100 stalls with the 20 surface stalls, that's still 120 parking stalls for 55,000 square feet. So that's essentially why.
So staff, then I'm probably even more confused as if the non-conforming building structure allows them to tear it down and build basically what they've proposed. I don't understand then why we're getting a net loss in parking. I mean, I guess, is there restrictions on the non-conforming building code that wouldn't allow them to build exactly what they've proposed to do under the RO zone?
So the RMU 45 zone has a lower height, so they could rebuild as is.
As what they have now.
Yeah.
So not go up to the 52 feet.
They could not
Got
go
it.
that tall.
Okay.
The RMU 45 has a 20-foot limit for non-residential uses. That being said, the existing parking structure is taller than that, and so they could rebuild to that height. within the same footprint. And the code allows, some minor modifications, but it would essentially need to remain in the same footprint.
Is a height exemption available in that code?
I don't
I guess you
believe-
can't combine replacing a non-conforming building plus,
increasing the nonconformity, right?
yeah. You can't increase the non-conformity. There's just no way to make that.
So, this is extremely complicated, and it seems like overly complicated. And I don't know what the deal is. RO seems to be like an antiquated zone. We're not even going to be using it again by this time next year. It's certainly not a good fit for this particular modification, I think. I don't know what else would be a good fit for this. But I guess that the staff's objection is basically that it's more parking and, well, that's just on the zoning thing. That it's more parking than it was. And also, why is it important that we approve a text amendment? Why do we, if we approve the RO zone, why do we need a text amendment why do we need text amendment?
So the text amendment, if the property was zoned RO, it would make the existing drive-through a permitted use. It would be conforming to code. I don't have all the background information from previous conversations, but from site plans that I've seen, preliminary site plans, the drive-through was relocated. They had proposed to relocate it from where it currently exists. So if you're going to increase, you can't increase that nonconformity. So it's remaining where it is as
If you don't approve the text amendment, then they can't move it from where it is.
correct.
Okay, but they're not proposing to move it from where
Not
it is.
anymore.
So we don't need the text amendment.
Technically, you don't.
After reading staff's report and kind of going through your same logic train, I would not be opposed to withdrawing the text amendment if that.
Good, thank you. Okay, 1 down, 2 to go. So, I'm sorry, I shouldn't take this, I'm not taking this lightly. I am concerned that we do have a safety issue that we need to have resolved. And is there no way to one of the things that this parking garage does is to reduce the height, the overall height, by going down a half level, which is pretty common in parking garages. The fact that it's not working right now doesn't mean that it couldn't work to do that exact same thing again. I mean, there are
Yeah, you can do
ways in
moderate.
which this design could easily be, accommodated with some different engineering to make sure that it doesn't fail the way that it has failed. So you could build as many stalls as you have now, at least, by just staying where you are with the same zone and rebuilding.
The only other thing I wanted to add about the RO zone and how they landed on it, the application's been in the works for over a year and a half. Policy has changed.
Yeah.
We didn't have a
Yep.
zoning consolidation
Yep.
moving forward, and so things have changed since they originally applied.
I'm very sympathetic.
I have one question. I can't remember for the zoning consolidation, are RO and RMU 45 going to be the same? No, they're not. Okay.
The RO would be a more intensive.
What's up?
The RO zone will end up in a more intensive form-based zone.
Okay.
RMU 45 will be in what is proposed to be the MU5 zone, and the RO is proposed to be, I believe, in the MU6 zone.
Okay. Wait, sorry. So RO is the 6? And
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. But will there still be the 20-foot non-residential? I assume that's still getting worked out, but
Yeah, we can't really base decisions off of that because of where it is in the process, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's good to know some information, but I would be hesitant to use that as a factor in deciding, because we don't know the outcome of what that's going to be.
Okay.
A thing that, like, if this moves forward, I mean, it will move forward to the city council, but just on both of your halves, what I understand the fundamental problem that America First is having is that they are unable to lease these spaces because they don't have enough parking. And what I think is important information for the city council to know is how much that's happening across the city, regardless whether people have parking or not. Spaces are pretty hard to lease right now, and I would just like them to be able to have the information of how hard is it actually, and is this actually going to solve the problem that America First has. It would be terrible if all of that investment happened and then the fundamental problem never got solved.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
just on, like, whoever, when that gets presented, I think that needs to be in the conversation.
Yeah.
So that we can have them make the most accurate choice that they can.
So one of the big things that America First does do, so one of the few tenants that is in the building is the Utah League of Credit Unions. They actually lease from us, and they actually monthly bring in seminars. They bring people in to have seminars in their building, which is above and beyond the standard lease spaces. So that's part of, and America First also does trainings in this building. But that it would be severely limited if we're not able. That's kind of why they chose that number, that 5-story level. It lets them not only lease every space, but have a little bit extra to get those peaks when we have trainings and seminars and people are coming who aren't employees and who need to occupy the space. But I do appreciate your recommendation and your information there, and we'll do whatever we can to try and help quantify, how I don't know about across the other places in the city, but we can definitely, from the America First side, look into how we can present that to the city council in a way that they can see the difficulties that we're experiencing.
Yeah.
One other question for the applicant. So you guys are renting or parking from the place across the street, which is also a split level.
Correct.
Is their lower level having flood issues, or is it more of a construction issue on the actual, like, is it just site specific that dewatering is really hard there, or is it that wasn't done well for
It's
that?
not that it's necessarily hard to do, it's just hard to do after the building's built.
No, retrofitting it would
But
be
I don't know about across the street. That's a great question. I have not gone in there. I don't know, Tim, if you have been over there. Yeah, we can ask. Good.
The structure is open, though, so I assume it's being used. The
gotcha. So, yeah.
half level is open.
Yeah, they haven't lost theirs, so.
Yeah, okay. So I think, I mean, my suggestion would also be to rebuild what's there. I think the one other thing to consider is that there's those apartments that are right next to it. So there's 3 levels of windows that would then, lose their light and be facing a parking lot. And so if dewatering isn't cost prohibitive, like just because of the water table in that site, right? It's just that it needs to be done better when that's rebuilt. I think that it would be a lot better for everyone to rebuild what's there, do dewatering a little bit better, and that way, people next door get to keep their light. But yeah.
I wonder if the setbacks that are called out in the plan development request, if those match the existing current setbacks for the existing parking.
The rear yard setback has been increased. So the current setback's about 5 feet, and they're increasing it to 15. The other setbacks are more or less the same. The height is the major difference, and then they are increasing that rear yard setback. Both zones have the same rear yard setback requirement, so it's a percentage of the lot, and it doesn't need to be more than 30 feet.
Okay.
So
Yeah, currently we're 4 feet from that residential apartment building, and we're increasing it to 15. So we are moving it away.
The planned development is based on a RO zoning. Okay, well, it seems to me that if whether we recommend that the rezoning happens or not, it seems like the planned development, approving that makes sense to me because it's conditioned on the RO rezoning, so that if the city council decides to rezone it, then they can rebuild the they can rebuild the parking structure the way it currently, at its current, little bit better actually, setbacks. So that makes sense to me. If whether or not we recommend the rezoning, it makes sense to me to approve the planned development. Because if we don't approve it, they can't do it for a year anyway.
Or there's a few options. So if you recommend denial and the city council decides to approve the rezone, they could work with the city council on a development agreement. You know, that could have higher standard, like design standards. I think one of the issues with the RO zone is it's the lack, there's no design standards in 21A37. So that they could negotiate with the city council at that level if it were to be denied. If it's approved,
Okay.
then it goes through.
But the way you
does
suggest
staff
makes
have
it easier.
Does staff have a preference about whether you do that in a development agreement, or if we do it as a planned development approval subject to rezoning?
I don't think there's a preference.
No preference, okay.
Can I weigh in on that? I would always prefer something to go through a process that's prescribed in our zoning code versus a development agreement.
Okay. Well, that sounds like maybe that whatever we vote on for the rezoning, it sounds to me, disagree with me if you want to, that we should approve the planned development.
I kind of disagree. I think that in that we are kind of a symbolic vote either way. When we are making a symbolic, I think we should have clear expectations of we want this to move forward, we don't want this to move forward. And to me, it's a little null and void where we parse hairs when the final decision is in their hands.
Well, the planned development is our decision. That's our decision. One is a recommendation to the city council, and planned development is our decision. So they are different.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah. Alternatively, we could table the plan development and make it contingent on city council approving the rezone.
I feel comfortable tabling it.
I think I just want to kind of chime in a little more on the whole thing. My understanding is that Salt Lake City has some of the most parking stalls per capita of a city of our size in the country. And from a citywide situation, if we continue to increase parking, then we will continue to have the same kind of development pattern that we have had thus far and can see in other places with even larger populations. So I guess I just want to stake my flag that I am not in favor of increasing the number of stalls, in part just from an induced demand standpoint. And I understand that there may be occasions where they may have conventions and things in this building that they may want to max out all of those stalls. There are many places, not even a block distant, where stalls could be rented, stalls could be procured. And also just, I don't see how this furthers the stated goals of the city in Plan Salt Lake and the neighborhood plan. And also just the fact that we're gaining like 47 or 46 stalls doesn't seem. I think that's all I'm going to say. That is my opinion, fellow commissioners. So there we are.
Can I just say just one thing regarding the plan development? So staff is recommending denial, right? You have my analysis. If you do recommend approval, then we need to tie that approval back to standards. How is this meeting the goals of the plan development? What objective has it made, and how so?
If we have no further discussion, then we can go ahead and start making some motions.
Can I say something before we, so
Go ahead.
I guess the only thing I would add is that I appreciate all your feedback on this and your considerations. So again, we're just trying to be able to park 250 to 300 people and get them parked on this site. Thank you.
I think I am prepared to make a motion. Firstly, I do really appreciate America First, and I love what they bring to the city, and I think that they are an important institution that I cherish. I also want to think of the city as a whole and the way that our stated goals are in relation to that. So my motion is motion to recommend denial of the information presented and discussion. I move that the commission forward a recommendation of denial to the city council for the zoning map amendment. I also recommend a motion of denial on the information and discussion for.
We do them one at a time.
Just one at a time?
Yeah, let's do it one
Okay.
at a time. And
The one.
also, you can just read it right off of the motion sheet.
I thought that was what that was. If somebody else wants to make a motion,
You did it fine.
I think that was.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and do it. So for PLN PCM 2022-01115 zoning map amendment, 455 East, 475 East, and 500 South, based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the commission forward a recommendation of denial to the city council for this zoning map amendment.
I second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Berry and a second from Commissioner Santos Rivera. Any discussion to the motion? Let's take a vote. Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Scott.
Yes.
Commissioner Shear.
No.
Commissioner Kratzik.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
No.
Commissioner Berry.
I also want to say that I also value you, and I really think you can achieve what you need by rebuilding what's there. And for events, you can, at least the ones you do across the street, but that's what I would really like to see, so I vote yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. That motion to recommend denial passes 6-2.
So I have a clarifying question. Can the applicant withdraw the text amendment motion during the meeting, or is it something we still have to handle? Because it's on the agenda.
I would prefer that anyone who withdraws any application do it in writing so that we have a record of that other than verbally. So my recommendation would be for you to consider making a motion regarding the text amendment.
So if we make a motion and we're making a recommendation to the city council, and then the applicant puts in a withdrawal in writing between now and the city council meeting, that would just nullify it anyway?
That ends
Okay.
that process for that.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and do that as well, on the presumption that you would take that action. But for PLN PCM 2023-00763, the text amendment, based on the information presented and discussion, I move the commission forward a recommendation of denial to the city council for this text amendment.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Barry and a second from Commissioner Shear. Any discussion to the motion? Let's take a vote. Commissioner Kratzik,
No.
Commissioner Burrows,
Recommendation to deny, right? Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. That recommendation for denial passes 7-1 and goes to the city council.
We don't need to do a third one, right? RO, or do we?
It, yeah,
Go to city council.
I would recommend doing a motion to table and make it contingent on the city council passing the,
All you need to do is table it pending the city council decision on the map amendment, because if the city council doesn't approve it, it doesn't matter.
I'll make that motion.
Can I have a procedural question? So then do we come back, like, let's say it does go through, we would come back to another?
yes, come
okay.
back and specifically address the plan development. And when making the motion, remember to specify whether to keep a public hearing open or closed.
Okay. I would like to make a motion to table this plan development request at 455 East, 500 South, until the city council decides on the rezoning, and keep the public comment open.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion from Commissioner Burrows and a second from Commissioner Tuttle. Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a point of order. I have a question. If we keep the, if we close the public hearing, do we still have to notice this on the agenda?
No, we don't. So.
And if we
well,
open
I'd
the
have to
public
double-
hearing,
I'd have to
we do
double
have to notice
check
it.
that because it won't be date certain. We probably will have to notice that actually. 'Cause
So it'll take longer if they have to come back.
well, no, we just will. It won't change the timeline.
Okay.
We'll just do the noticing far enough in advance enough to accommodate that.
Okay, thank you.
Let's take a vote. Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
No.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Kratzik,
No.
Commissioner Santos Rivera.
Yes.
And the chair also votes yes. That motion to table the plan development passes 6-2.
Thank you.
And we will go ahead and move to the next item, number 2. Continuation of driveways and loading text amendment, case number PLN PCM 2023-00937. And our planner is Madison Blodgett.
This is a presentation for the proposed driveways and loading text amendment. The request was initiated by the mayor to correct driveway and loading area standards found in the zoning code that are creating unintended consequences. The proposed changes fix issues that the current standards to the current standards and adequately address vehicular access needs and support good urban design. On
Check to make sure your presentation is.
Oh, is it not? So on March 27th, the proposal was presented to Planning Commission, and due to concerns with removing the loading area requirement, the item was tabled. Staff has revised the proposal with consideration of the concerns raised by the Commission, and after making these changes, it is staff's recommendation to forward a positive recommendation to City Council. So as a refresher for those identified issues, the maximum combined driveway, those issues include the maximum combined driveway width, which currently the code applies the maximum driveway width to all driveways on a lot combined, which has resulted in situations where the number and size of driveways are inconsistent with the use and the lot size. Another issue is the applicability of the driveway width standards. As the code is currently written, the driveway width standards apply only to the front and corner side yards, and this creates issues for applications since there are zones that do not have required front or corner side yards. Another issue is that the code does not clearly distinguish the terms driveway and access, even though there are separate sections and standards for each. And the last issue is the issue with loading, and this is where the changes have been made. After considering the concerns, we've narrowed down the issue, and the issue is really the 14-foot vertical clearance requirement, specifically for multifamily uses. To address these issues, the following changes are proposed. To modify standards for driveway widths, distinguish driveway and drive approach standards, and establish vehicular staging standards for garage doors. 21A 44070 is being amended to reduce the vertical clearance requirement for loading areas for residential uses from 14 feet to 9 feet. Adding definitions for driveway and drive approach, as well as some other amendments to other related sections of 21A. The proposal details. So to address the issues identified with driveway standards, the proposal removes the maximum width to all driveways combined and will apply to each individually. As demonstrated by this image, the example on the top shows how the current code applies to a lot that would be in the M1 zone, and this would be a corner lot. So while the lot has a total of 600 feet of frontage, only 2 driveways with a maximum combined width of 50 feet would be permitted. And this, especially like an M1 zone, does not provide adequate access for an industrial use that has large industrial trucks coming in and out of the lot. To address this, the bottom example shows what the proposal would do. So it's the same lot, but under the under the proposed code, the maximum lot width would be reduced to 30 feet for M1, but it would be for each driveway individually. And in addition to amending the driveway width standards, the proposal also makes changes to the number of curb cuts that are allowed. So the proposal is to allow 1 curb cut for the first 100 feet of frontage and an additional curb cut for every 250 feet of street frontage after the initial 100. So basically, to have 2 curb cuts, a minimum of 350 feet of frontage would be required. So in this example, there'd be a maximum allowed of 3 driveways for this lot in this example. The proposal also renames access to drive approach and defines the term, which helps create clarification on what a drive approach is and where it's located. And with that, the proposal also changes the driveway width standards to apply to drive approaches rather than driveways, since by definition, a drive approach can only be located in the right-of-way, which eliminates the applicability issue for zones without required front and corner side yards. The width of a driveway is still regulated, though, as the proposal includes language that the width of the driveway must match the width of the drive approach. In addition to defining drive approach, the proposal also defines driveway. And the proposal also adds language to address vehicle staging for driveways that provide access to garage doors to match similar language in the code addressing vehicle staging for gates. And as for the changes to loading, so after the concerns from last time, rather than removing the loading requirement entirely, we've narrowed down exactly what the main issues were, and it was the 14-foot vertical clearance specifically for multifamily uses. And that is because, so the average parking garage and ground floor is less than 14 feet. And in order to accommodate a loading area with 14 feet, it would end up having to like extend into the second floor, which takes away valuable space that could be used for an additional unit, as well as since the loading area has a higher clearance than a typical parking garage, it's normally not going to be located in the parking garage, which would mean there's going to have to be an additional driveway or a wider driveway in order to provide access to it. And this also creates issues for lots because a lot of times these multifamily uses take up the whole lot because there's not much setback requirement. And that's an issue if you need another driveway when under this proposal, if the lot's less than 350 feet, they're only allowed one driveway. And as you can see in this image, it exemplifies how that's an issue. So in that top image, as you can see, the loading area is separate and it extends into the second floor, taking away space that could be used for a unit and requiring, a wider driveway. Whereas on the bottom image, you can see, since the loading area, it does not have to be separate and can be incorporated into the parking garage, an additional unit can be added and the driveway can be reduced. And then lastly, the proposal renames loading area to loading facility. Since throughout the code, multiple terms are used to refer to loading facility, such as berth, dock, and area. So to create clarity and consistency, the umbrella term loading facility is used. And to conclude, based on the information discussed, staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to City Council.
Thank you. I have one question, whether we, when we made the motion to table this, did we keep the public hearing open?
It's advertised on the agenda as a public hearing, so.
Gotcha. Okay. Any questions from the commission?
The residential loading zones apply to what size of residential building? I mean, under a certain number of units or under a certain size? What's the
So it's for any, it's 80 units or more.
80 units or more? Okay, thank you.
Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. If anyone would like to give comment, go ahead and approach the microphone. Have we received any emails?
We have not.
We will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and a motion.
I have a problem with the 9 feet. I went online today and looked at the truck sizes for U-Haul trucks, which are the standard way or a way a person can sort of do this. And the minimum height of the smallest truck that they have is 9 feet. And that's a 10-foot truck, and it only holds like not very much. And all the other trucks are at least 11 feet in height. And the 26-foot truck, which is a sort of regular truck, not a big truck, but just not a 18-wheeler, but just a truck. The minimum height is 13 feet or 14 feet. So I called a couple of movers and said, what is your height requirement for a truck? And they said that, and these were small movers that move like 1 or 2 bedroom places, and they said their trucks were all 14 feet or required a 14-foot minimum. So I don't know where we got the 9-foot number, but that doesn't seem realistic for any kind of moving vehicle, except for a van or something like that. And if you're talking about an 80-unit apartment building, I still think we need a loading dock. Maybe we want to raise the number of units or raise it to a certain number of square feet, which would make more sense. But I really do think that number seems not really very realistic in terms of the actual trucks out there on the road. It only accommodates one very small part of the moving truck market.
If I could say something. So when doing research for this, what we found was that the average moving truck was less than 9 feet. And we also
9 feet in the size of its box. It's not 9 feet clearance height. Okay, so that you have to add in 2.5 feet for the wheels. Okay.
So with your research, is that what you were finding? You were finding 9 feet above the cab, or within the cab, within the box, or was that not clear, or what did your research?
So our research, I guess, when looking at it, didn't specifically look, okay, if that's just a cab or if that's like the truck in total. It was more just like, what's the vertical clearance of the typical moving truck, and that's what we found was to be like 8 point something. Additionally, we also did research on other cities and what they have for loading areas, and what we found was that so for example in I believe it was Portland, their vertical clearance for residential uses was 9 feet, and in Denver they do it based upon like the site development, so like each one can differ, whereas like what they have for their commercial and their industrial uses is just like a set 14 feet.
How do they determine that per project? Is that like they kind of like lighting standards, in that when a project is approved, it's kind of like talked through with staff to determine that like height for that specific development?
Yeah, so what I saw in their code, it said specifically at site development, like at their site development process. So I would assume that would be with staff at the time of, submittal of something, and they're looking at the site plans.
For me, I feel like we could recommend a change like that so that it's flexible a little bit to developments, accommodating for the 14-foot when needed, and just being able to be a little more specific about each development having a requirement to have a functional loading dock that would be seen and addressed by staff. There's some skepticism to my left.
Making those on the go are complex, so I suggest the commission to consider tabling it so that we can look into it. I believe that the average for U-Haul for non-commercial purposes is 12 feet clearance, but I would suggest to table it, and then the staff can look a little bit more in depth for those specific clearance and lodging requirements.
I think it's these trucks are pretty standard. I mean, they vary very little. And from what I could see, I looked on Ryder trucks, I looked at 26-foot trucks, I looked at lots of different things, and they were all like, this is why we use 14 feet, because it's very standard. And I understand that this is difficult, but one of the reasons why we wanted to not give up on having a loading area was when you have, and I don't know if 80 is the right number, frankly. Maybe it's more than that in terms of number of units. So we're not really driving people nuts. But if you have 100 units, and most of them recycle once every year, then you've got somebody parked in front of your building every 2 days.
Which is a valid concern, because that's what happens, is that people just park. Yeah,
and that's why we sort of tabled this to begin with, to make sure that we could at least accommodate some
Yeah.
loading within these things. And, okay, yeah. So the thing, I would not necessarily change the height, but I might change the minimum number of units, or to a minimum size requirement. I mean, maybe units doesn't make any sense, but maybe a size requirement makes sense. Or you could lower it to 12 feet if you had like all one bedroom or studio or something more granular than that, which is probably what the Portland guys were thinking, is that they could, sort of do this, oh, this is all studio apartments, nobody's going to move in with a giant truck. But, the movers, they use the same size truck. You don't take up all of it, that's fine. But it's still the same size. So just because you're moving into a studio doesn't mean you're coming there with a little truck.
So, Mr. Chair, it seems like the Planning Commission has a couple of options. And tabling's already been brought up. I don't know what value that actually is going to add if we're just going to look at 12 or 14 or whatever feet. So one thing that the commission could consider is if you support the rest of the changes, you can make a motion to do that and not change the height, or do what Commissioner Scheer just recommended, looking at like what Portland did, where if you're 1 or 2 bedroom or studio, you're probably getting a small truck because you just don't have a lot of stuff. You're not going to be getting the biggest U-Haul truck but sometimes that might be all that's available, right? So my suggestion would be to move it forward if that's what you want to do, without that change in the loading dock height.
With those suggestions, we are open for a motion.
I'm willing to take a stab at it. If Commissioner Scheer would rather do it herself, that's fine.
I'm just trying to look up where it is in the text, in the paragraphs in the text.
Gotcha.
So that's,
But if I can have a second to write down my wording, I'd appreciate that.
A 44.070.
So staff, Madison, what do you call it when, just clarify for me, if you're looking at changing the way we evaluate the standard of like what will then instigate this? Like, what's the wording that would be preferable to use for that? So if we changed it to looking at, instead of 80 units, 100 units, or we look at the size of the unit makeup of the actual building, how would staff prefer that to be articulated?
Do you mean like, as in like what that term is, or would you rather saying like square feet over units?
I don't want to limit. What I would like to get at is suggesting to the city council to evaluate ways in which changing that evaluation
Like the threshold?
of when the loading dock is required. Got it.
Commissioner Berry, there's a table on page 9 of our staff report. No, not 9 of the, not of the staff report, of the actual text attachment A,
Got it.
where we would, where it calls for 80 to 200 or greater than 200
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we just keep that number at 14 for now.
Yeah.
Make
Okay.
that one change, and I think we're good.
Can you pull up, would you pull up the motion sheet for me? Or leave that and then, okay, thanks. I need two things. Can I just borrow it? Thanks. All right. For PLN PCM 2023-00937, driveways and loading text amendment, based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission forward a recommendation to adopt this zoning text amendment to the city council with the additional recommendation that we leave the 14 feet height for loading docks for vertical clearance for multifamily residential, and that the city council look at changing or look at the standard of which when the loading dock is required. And based on the number of dwelling units, or should it be based on the configuration of units within the building, and leave that up to them?
I'll second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Barry and a second from Commissioner Kratzik. Any discussion to the motion? Let's take a vote. Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Kratzik,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera,
Yes.
and the chair also votes yes. That positive recommendation passes unanimously and goes to the city council. We will go ahead and move on to the next item. Item number 3, prohibiting distribution centers on former Northwest Quadrant landfill sites, text amendment. Case number PLN PCM 2024-00226. And our planner is Andy Holka.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request from the mayor to initiate a zoning text amendment to prohibit distribution centers on the former North Temple landfill site located within the Northwest Quadrant overlay. The intent of the proposal is to avoid the concentration of a single land use and to allow for diverse uses as outlined in the Northwest Quadrant Master Plan. Subject property you can see highlighted on your screen. It's located at 6780 West North Temple Street. It's west of the airport and the International Center, north of I-80. It's a very large property, covers approximately 765 acres, about a mile and a half across, and nearly the same size as the International Center. Was used as a landfill for 20 years, from 1959 to 1979. Is currently owned by SITLA, the Utah School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration. So the amendment you can see is the new language that would be added to the code is in red with an underline on your screen. We've got 2 notable changes. The first change is to add a new definition for distribution center. The current ordinance looks at distribution centers as typically either wholesale distribution or package delivery facilities. These terms have been in the zoning ordinance since the 90s, predating current development trends involving large e-commerce logistics centers that primarily distribute individual products directly to consumers. So because of that, we felt it was needed to add a new definition to address these new, more common types of distribution centers. And also, additional language has been added to clarify that accessory distribution to either a distribution center or wholesale distribution is not considered a distribution center as the primary use. So just for example, this amendment would not prohibit a manufacturing business in that location from shipping the products that are made on site. The second change that is being proposed is a new footnote in the land use table stating that distribution centers, package delivery facilities, truck freight terminals, warehouses, and wholesale distribution uses are prohibited on the North Temple landfill site as identified in the Northwest Quadrant Master Plan. So why is the city doing this? First up, the city's petition coincides with a new law passed by the state legislature during their most recent legislative session. SB 264 established a new definition for distribution center in the state code and stated that contaminated land may not be used for a distribution center. Contaminated land includes any land with hazardous materials or landfill material. One purpose for the text amendment is to ensure that the city code and state code are in alignment. Because the state code was already passed, this is law now. Even if the city doesn't take any action, distribution centers are already going to be prohibited here on that side. The Northwest Quadrant Plan is the applicable long-range plan for this area of the city. The plan actually includes a pretty specific vision for this site in particular. The area is envisioned as a major gateway to the city, acting as an employment center with higher wage jobs. The plan even includes the concept sketch, which is on your screen, showing the area developed as a gateway with offices, hotels. It even shows a commuter rail station on this picture. And while that's only conceptual, it does illustrate the city's vision to have something unique that acts as a gateway to people as they enter the city from the west, driving along I-80. The proposed text amendment is intended to help realize the city's vision for this area through allowing development of a variety of other types of uses. To help illustrate some of the current development patterns in the area, staff analyzed new construction in the Northwest Quadrant. After the master plan was adopted in 2016, most of the land in this area was rezoned from agricultural to light manufacturing. And since that time, almost all of the new development in the area has been warehousing or distribution-related uses. The map on the screen shows new distribution centers in red, uses that have at least a portion of the building devoted towards some sort of manufacturing are marked in yellow. And then you have the utility and prison properties in the darker gray, and then undeveloped areas is the lighter white color. There's also a blue hatched area on the map. It's a little bit hard to see, but that shows the areas that have development agreements in place. The development agreements were put in place shortly after the rezoning that vested those properties with the rights to develop according to the 2018 zoning ordinance. So no change to the zoning ordinance that the city adopts today would be able to prevent distribution centers on those sites. The subject property is one of the few remaining undeveloped parcels in the Northwest Quadrant that is subject to city land use controls. So it's important to note population growth, economic growth, e-commerce, and increased consumption habits all led to an increased need for warehousing and distribution centers nationwide. These facilities are still important, and they are a beneficial part of our economy, but studies have shown that warehousing districts can sometimes have negative impacts. So there are studies that have shown association between warehouse activity and air pollution, noise levels, increase traffic collisions. And these uses are typically more disproportionately cited in low-income and minority communities, so those negative impacts can become an environmental justice concern. There are also studies that show that warehousing industry typically has lower job densities, so not as many jobs given the large amount of area that's required for these uses, and often that those jobs are not as well paid, and they are increasingly at risk of being automated. And so some of those jobs are predicted to go away in the future. So and while that is not necessarily the primary reason for this, it is something that should be considered as you evaluate this proposal. So during the public comment period, we received several comments, one from a resident in favor of the proposal due to concerns about inland port areas around the Great Salt Lake. There was a comment from Property Reserve, the owner of the Cannon Pioneer landfill. They requested updates to the language to clarify that this was not intended to impact other landfill properties. And so we did adjust our language after receiving that comment to make that clarification. And then a comment from NT Development, the developer working to develop the property, in opposition to the petition because it restricts their ability to develop according to the market demands. Portions of the property are expected to be developed and sold in phases in order to fund the remediation of the rest of the site. And so the developer argues that the city is restricting the ability to do that, which could slow down the process of remediating the site and developing. So based on that analysis of the city policies, best practices, the zoning ordinance, applicable state code, we recommend that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation to the City Council to approve the text amendment. That's all that I have for now. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions before we open the public hearing?
Just one clarification. So in the state law where it says notwithstanding a permitted or conditional use allowed under applicable municipal ordinances, contaminated land may not be used for a distribution center. That's saying that what you were saying before, right? That even if it says you can do it in the city code, it doesn't matter, right? Just the word notwithstanding confuses me there.
Yes, yeah, that's essentially what that's saying.
Yeah, the simplest way to think of that word is in spite of, right?
So why are we identifying one landfill property? Are the other landfill properties already entitled or under development agreement or?
What I would say is just probably from our perspective, at least as staff reviewing this, the Northwest Quadrant Plan is pretty specific about 7200 West and I-80 as deserving some sort of special treatment. The Northwest Quadrant Plan does identify all of the landfills as potential opportunities for future redevelopment and states that the city should work with those property owners to get them remediated and developed. But the same direction to treat it as something different and to encourage something more doesn't exist in the plan. And so that would be my response. I don't know if Nick, you have something to
Yeah, I'm also going to add some context about that specific section of state law. So back when the Inland Port Authority was established, it created a situation where the city has to allow all land uses that would be considered inland port supportive land uses. And so we have to, we couldn't prohibit this use on the jurisdictional lands that are in Salt Lake City, which is, I think, roughly, boy, it's been a long time since I've looked at those numbers, but it's in the thousands of acres. This last year, the state legislature carved this piece out specifically. And so even though it's one piece of property, it's also 700 and something acres of land. So it's not like it's a small piece of, I think the city is supportive of seeing other types of uses other than just distribution centers located in in our industrial area because of the, and Andy touched on this, but really the environmental impact to our air quality and our quality of life for those people who live the closest to the industrial area of the city, which are also areas that have historically been marginalized by high impactful land uses. So if we can reduce that as a city, we support reducing it.
Calling out that one property, though, it doesn't mean that it's specifically allowed on the other landfill properties.
It means it would be allowed elsewhere in the M1 zoning district. And specifically in other inland port jurisdictional lands. And as Andy pointed out, properties that entered into a development agreement with the city to essentially lock them into their zoning back in 2018. So this would not apply to those. This specific property does not have a development agreement on it.
Right.
So follow up on that. What is the alternative? Like, what is on the pipeline or potential other uses besides light manufacturing and distribution?
Well, I think, you know, on this slide hits on it. One of the big things are various uses that have high number of job density, right? So this is a really important spot for really the future of West Side Transit, particularly along the Mountain View corridor, because of its location. If there's not job density in a location, which there isn't in most manufacturing zones, there's not going to be any possibility for transit. It's just not going to happen. And we know that if we want to see some forms of alternative transportation in the Northwest Quadrant, we need to have some spot where there is job density so that various microtransit programs can work. Without that, they're not going to work.
Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. If you would like to speak on this item, go ahead and approach the microphone. And over there. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Minutes?
Yep.
First of all, go on the record, I wasn't hungry when I came in here this afternoon, but after smelling everybody's dinner, I'm quite hungry, so I hope you excuse me if you hear any stomach growling. My name is Gary McEntee. I'm the managing member of NT Development, which is a joint venture between Sitla and Ninnigut Development. We are tasked with remediating the North Temple landfill and redeveloping it. I've been working on that for the last 6 years. I believe you have a letter from our attorney, which we've retained a legal counsel on this issue because we obviously oppose this quite a bit. If you want, we have questions, or if not, I can reiterate some of our concerns, so we do that. We don't understand why this particular piece of property is being restricted when other areas in the Northwest Quadrant is not. Our other question is, does the city expect to restrict other uses within the M1 zone besides just the warehousing? We don't understand the rationale here. This is a 770-acre piece of property. If you look at the 2016 master plan, and we look at our development plan, we have different uses at 7,200 at the gateway. This is never to be a 770 acres of warehouses. So if you look at our development plan, which we've shared with the city, which is why this caught us by such surprise, we have a bunch of mixed uses. The whole idea of an absolute prohibition for any distribution warehouses on this property makes no sense to us. We do not understand the rationale. Part of a healthy development is to have mixed use, multiple uses, manufacturing, warehouse, office, industrial, university uses. That's our plan. That's been our plan for the last 5 years, and the city has been given that plan when we first started this process. If you look at the property, 770 acres, and you focus on what Andrew was talking about, 7,200 being the gateway, we're a mile and a half to the east of that property, okay? A mile and a half away, there's rail that comes in there. It's perfect for that mixed use of manufacturing and distribution use of rail. If you look at the property, an eighth of a mile to the left of us, or to the west of us, there's no restriction on that property. So we don't understand how the 770 acres has a total prohibition when you're focusing on the 7,200 area.
Yeah, that's 2 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to give comment? Any emails?
We have not received anything that aren't otherwise in your staff report.
We will go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and a motion.
I have a quick question for staff. Is the entire site comprised of the landfill, or does the landfill only take up a portion of that acreage?
I couldn't speak to the details of specifically how much includes contaminated area, but the entire site is identified as the landfill site for purposes of this amendment.
Just as a discussion for the other commissioners, I also share Commissioner Burrow's kind of questioning of singling out this. I feel like if we were going to be in compliance with state code, then any area in any land in this area that was a landfill should also be included in prohibiting distribution centers to bring us into compliance with state code. So I'm not so much like on board with like carving out, unless there is a development agreement, like I get that. But if we're carving out other areas that were landfills, why they would not also be subject to the state code that prohibits distribution centers on contaminated sites. I also question taking the entire acreage if the entire parcel was not a landfill, that we're not being genuine in saying this is the part that's contaminated that we can't do. And then I guess I have another question, Andy. So if a contaminated site is remediated, does state code then have a provision that that quantifies when an area is no longer contaminated based on remediation?
I would have to check the state code.
I'm not sure
don't
that
know
this
the
is
answer to
about remediation or landfill or anything else. It's about reserving some land for higher density development.
Well, then we should be having that discussion in a different context than specifying out contaminated areas based on state code shouldn't be allowed to have distribution centers. If we really want to have the discussion that you're talking about, I'm all for it. But we probably should have a different proposal in front of us for that. If that is the real crux of it, of what we're really trying to get to. If we're going to take it on the basis of complying with state code that says contaminated areas can no longer have distribution centers, we shouldn't be singling out one landfill. We should be grabbing all of the areas that were landfills and including that in there. But then I also think we have the additional question of if a site is remediated, then does that free it up from what was a contaminated site? And that's an outstanding question of me. Like, is there a part where a site no longer is contaminated? And does state code deal with that at all?
So
And if we really want to have a different discussion,
I
then
don't
I think
see
it's great.
any reference to contaminated. Why this is being done because of
staff brought
contamination?
it up that it was state
Yeah, but
code.
in
that
the
said that.
in the staff report, in the state code, it's
It's in the state code that staff referenced that contaminated distribution centers are no longer allowed on contaminated sites. So, in the staff presentation was saying that even if the city doesn't move forward on this or doesn't make this change, that a distribution site would still not be allowed to be built on this site because it's contaminated. So why are we only talking about this landfill when there are other landfills out in that same area that are perhaps not part of a development agreement? Why are those also not included if this is the standard that we're basing this on?
So this gets back to what the plan says about the importance of that intersection at 200 West. It is far different than any other site where there's a landfill because of that and the future of, like I said, the transit on Mountain View corridor and the city's plans, the Northwest Quadrant plan for that general area
Then
where
I
this
think we've
landfill is.
muddied this for me because we've introduced this compliance with state code component, but only for this landfill.
This is a situation where we do not need to change our code to comply with state code. We are doing this because of the importance of the plan. The state code opened the door for us to make this change. Without that, we would not be able to prohibit distribution centers in this specific location. We wouldn't be able to implement the Northwest Quadrant plan fully.
So then I guess the question is, why do we even need to do this if it's covered under state code?
So the main reason is state code can change, but what they've done is that they have opened the door for us to carve out 700 plus acres of land that otherwise would be contained distribution centers. We don't know how much of the land would do that, but based on the development patterns that are occurring in the Northwest Quadrant, it's going to be a significant piece. And so what this proposal does is it gives the city the say in how that develops. And because the state code, even if it changes in the future, they would have to make it retroactive. And if that happens next year down the road, so be it. But the city wants to maintain their land use authority specific as best they can, and on this specific piece of property of significant size to be able to implement our Northwest Quadrant plan.
I get that goal. I agree with that goal. I just don't know why this. I'm just not on board with the path of
And
this
that's fine.
part. So that's, but I understand that a little bit better. So thank you.
Andy, would it be possible to go back to the land use map where you have laid out the properties that are the sites that are vested? So the sites that are vested, sorry, I can't see well, are the ones on the top right corner, well, left corner, I guess, but on the right. Those are the ones that are vested currently.
So if you can see the mouse, the subject property is here towards the bottom of the shaded area. And then you can see in blue, the blue hatch marks are the development agreement areas. So here's the prison. This extends out.
Yeah, what is that exactly? Like land use wise, like what is that carved area that looks like Tetrix?
The areas that I haven't highlighted with any color that are outside of the development area are either all agriculture or open space zones.
Yeah, perfect.
South of I-80 is mostly M1 as well. Depending on, along 5600 West, we have some commercial zoning, but typically for the most part, it's all M1.
I'm really happy to actually seeing this in front of us. So I am in full support to approve this motion.
Are we required to make a recommendation, or could we just decide not to make a recommendation? That's a real
State
question.
code does say that the planning commission needs to make a recommendation. If you don't, the city council can actually move forward without a
Okay, right.
recommendation.
Right.
I'm ready to make a motion. Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission forward a recommendation to adopt this zoning text amendment to the city council.
Second.
We have a motion from, Commissioner Shear, and who made the second? Okay, Commissioner Santos Rivera made the second. Any discussion to the motion? Well, let's go ahead and take a vote. Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Kratzik,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Scott,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos Rivera,
Yes.
and the chair also votes yes. That motion to recommend approval passes unanimously and goes to the city council. Let's take a 5-minute break and come back for a final item at 7:53. a work session, zoning consolidation project. And contrary to the agenda stating that it's Nick Norris, we have Aaron Barlow presenting.
Thanks for the introduction. Nick will chime in and provide support as we move through this. This is the second presentation in a series regarding the commercial and mixed-use zoning consolidation project. Specifically, we'll be discussing the MU2 and MU3 districts, and I'll get into what exactly that means and what those are. But I want to start with a roadmap of what we're going to do at this presentation, this discussion. First, I'm going to go over the goals of the zoning consolidation project and the guiding principles. Then we'll discuss form-based code basics so you get an idea of what we looked to when developing this code, and then we'll get into some of the meat for the MU2 and MU3 district proposals. So the project goals, at the last presentation that Nick gave, he laid out what kind of the goals of this mixed-use zoning consolidation project is. And first is to align the project line zoning with the land use policy and improve consistency within the regulations, reduce any redundancies that might be going on, and reduce conflicts between different sections of the code. And as he mentioned, developers run into a lot of issues. So do planners feel like we are running a college program here, trying to interpret our code at times. So there are some guiding principles that we've been trying to follow when drafting these regulations. The first is really to maintain any existing property rights as much as we can, so those things don't change, and in order to reduce any new non-conforming uses and minimize creating any non-complying buildings. Anything that works in certain codes, we want to be able to take and put in other areas, and promote mixed-use development whenever possible. All right, getting into form-based code. Form-based code is really building type focused. There's an emphasis on building design and building function, and depending on the function of the building, there may be specific regulations. So for a commercial mixed-use storefront building, we'll have different standards than a row house or a single-family building because they have different functions in a community, in a district. Developing the form-based code, there's certain elements that staff look to these elements of the form-based code help develop the requirements, the regulations, the shape of the specific building form. And so kind of going through these, the first is building placement, where the building is located on the building, or on the lot. That could be setbacks or the number of buildings on a lot. It really depends on the function of a building form. If it's a storefront, a row house, a cottage court, those setbacks will vary to accommodate that specific use. The other is building mass. Again, how tall a building can be, how wide it is, the style of the roof, how much of the lot it covers. All those things are determined by the type of building form within the code. Then there are specific design features, with entryways. A residential entry is going to look different than a commercial entry. Window glazing is going to be different for commercial versus residential versus, a row house or a multifamily. And then there's actually the use type on the ground floor, especially when you're having like a commercial use on that floor. And we have a lot of discussions here about that, especially in like the TSA districts in Fort South and the challenges there. Another piece is the connectivity. What types of transportation are best suited for that type of use or that type of building form? Focusing on mid-block walkways, driveway placement, where parking is located, and sidewalk width and things of that nature. So getting into the details about the MU2 and MU3 districts. Both of these districts are intended to protect and maintain existing neighborhoods serving commercial. I know that's been a discussion point in the past. Some of our zoning districts have seen encroachment of residential development into really important neighborhood commercial nodes. But there's also that effort to limit impacts of commercial development on residential neighborhoods. And it's meant to encourage mixed use, that pedestrian-oriented development. We want to see pedestrians on the ground using transit, getting around, and then keeping parking loading areas behind buildings kind of in line with that pedestrian-oriented development. Getting into more specifics, so the MU2 district would be a consolidation of the CN commercial neighborhood, the SMB small neighborhood business, and RB residential business districts. It's a small scale district up to 2 stories and would only permit residential in mixed use buildings and mixed use contexts. And the MU3 district consolidates the CB community business district and RMU residential mixed use 35-foot district, slightly larger in scale in both size and more intense uses, and would allow some residential only building forms in those areas that are not identified as important commercial and neighborhood nodes or intersections. So here's just a visual of the 3 districts that make up the MU2 district. You can see the RB district generally is located along some parts of 9th South, 1100 East. This is a great example of a house that's been turned into a business. That was sort of the goal, to maintain that residential character while allowing those commercial uses. The SMB district was developed for those existing commercial buildings, commercial lots that really are kind of sticking out in a neighborhood. This specific business is in the avenues, about 6th Avenue, kind of by the Smiths. There are these buildings that have a business commercial character, were built many, many years ago, a corner grocery, and may have been zoned residential a long time ago. And the intent is, if you have a property like that, we would rezone it as SMB. So it could be used as its commercial function. And then the CN district, you may be most familiar with, is the most commonly seen with the Planning Commission. That is your neighborhood level commercial at smaller intersections. Right here, the 27-9 is a Pilates studio with some residential dwelling units, 2 stories, lower intensity commercial use. And these are typically found within neighborhoods to really serve those neighborhoods and maybe multiple neighborhoods in a given area. So the goals of the MU2 zoning district was to allow only storefront and commercial mixed-use buildings. That really is, maintain that commercial emphasis, and then keeping commercial uses to a lower intensity, and really limit residential uses to where they are already located, exclusively residential uses. So like houses and row houses and things, they can continue, but they cannot encroach into those commercial areas. Getting more specific, here's some of the details that we've established within this proposed district. For the ground floor, keeping it majority commercial, the height up to 2 stories, 30 feet, hence the name MU2 is a 2-story mixed-use commercial district. Limiting building size to 5,000 square feet, or it would require design review if going beyond that. This is one area that staff wanted to discuss with you, front setbacks. The intent was to really bring it near sidewalks and accommodate amenities like outdoor dining, plazas, and things. But a great example of a neighborhood commercial building that works is the King's English bookstore here. You can see it's not really near the sidewalk. There's not a lot of outdoor dining amenities. It's this, and you see it in the RB district as well, these kind of residential character buildings that function as a commercial use. So really wanted to get your opinion on do you want to see more of this or more of the storefront style commercial, like in that 27-9 building? And we'll get to that. If you have any thoughts, let me know at the end of this presentation. And then things like lot width, trying to reduce land banking and buildings that are too large by keeping lot width to a minimum, and then placing parking behind buildings.
So could these have residential on the upper floor?
Yeah, there has to be a commercial component. Residential could be on the top floor, to the side, in the areas that aren't required to have commercial. That residential element just needs to have the storefront commercial piece to it.
So does it have a minimum commercial square footage or percentage or something like that?
Yeah, currently we've proposed about 2/3 of or 65% of a building facade. More discussion of that will come up. There will be more presentations on specifics about design standards and things. And we've placed those requirements in the design. Oh, can you hear me okay? There we go. So yeah, 65% at this point, with a depth of 25 feet, sort of what's already in place for a lot of areas. And you know, we're open to what that discussion should look, what those pieces should look like. So then the MU3 district consolidates two districts that have a similar character but a different way of approaching it. The RMU 35 district is a higher intensity district with commercial uses in areas that may have a lot of residential. And the CB district is our community business neighborhood node commercial district that may also have some residential uses. So the idea with the MU3 district is to designate specific locations where commercial only are, you know, storefront commercial, similar to what we've discussed, ground floor commercial at designated locations, and allowing exclusively residential uses outside of those areas, but requiring that commercial element within those neighborhood nodes. The scale is moderately, it's a little bit greater than that of the MU2, 3 stories. The uses are more intense. Then it also would be accommodating existing grocery stores and gas stations. As you know, gas stations are a conditional use in the CB district, and that kind of is a point of discussion we'll get to in just a sec. So the MU3 district, getting into details, requiring commercial at those important locations, up to 3 stories, 4 stories through a design review process. Building size up to 7,500 square feet, which is the requirement in the CB district right now. Anything larger having to go through design review and having additional requirements regarding roof line and building design, glass, all these things that help to avoid overly large buildings that are imposing on pedestrians. A front setback of maximum of 15 feet, allowing some exceptions for outdoor dining and plazas. Side setbacks only when adjacent to residential districts, and the same thing, keeping lot widths to a minimum and keeping parking behind buildings. This is the area where I wanted to get some of your thoughts. Developing these districts have brought up some challenges. In the MU2 district, there are competing objectives within the districts that are being consolidated. For example, as we discussed, that CN is for storefronts and intersections. The RB is commercial districts with a residential character. And the SMB district is for those non-conforming commercial buildings that are within residential neighborhoods. And, you know, trying to balance the pushing for that storefront commercial, maintaining that residential character. There's this push and pull within that, and trying to balance that can be challenging. The push has really been for that mixed use, and since you know you have that residential encroachment into commercial districts, that's been the intent and what we've tried to work towards. There's also the challenge of existing residential buildings and trying to carve out that space so that if you have a single-family house, if you have a fourplex, that can continue in a way that isn't overly difficult with the legal non-conforming process or legal non-complying structures like we saw today with the parking garage, trying to accommodate those existing residential uses without allowing them to encroach into commercial areas. The MU3 district, you know, it has sort of become the de facto grocery store district, and most of the city's grocery stores are in that district, and trying to figure out how to balance those grocery stores. For example, you know, should they be allowed to freely expand? Should staff place requirements on those expansions in certain areas? Or should they be held to the same standard as any other commercial development? And the same goes for gas stations. Where should they be located? Is the recent amendment proposal that you saw enough for to kind of limit their impact, or do we need to do more? And then there are competing objectives between the CB and the RMU 35. The CB district is a primarily commercial district with some residential, and the RMU 35 district covers a lot of residential neighborhoods and more of a smattering of commercial spaces that have that higher intensity commercial use. And like I said, there will be more presentations, more discussions about this zoning consolidation project. There'll be discussions about design standards and specific land uses. And with that, happy to get into discussion about details. I want to hear your opinions.
So I have a question and then some feedback on things you asked for. So is when under connectivity, when we're prioritizing mid-block walkways, does the form-based codes also going to be putting form standards to those walkways?
And that's correct. In these two districts, it's not as strict.
Sure, I'm like kind of broadly, because you brought this up as like trying to help us understand form-based codes a little better. So that's really where I'm landing, because I just wonder, under the connectivity part, just saying we want mid-block walkways, or are we also prescribing some form standards to that? Because we should.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I have a couple feedback. So in the RM or the MU2, my personal feeling on that is that we do allow some of that setback, especially we're going to have a lot of it anyway, because we have a lot of small businesses that are occupying former residential houses. But it shouldn't have to be like a yard, like say King's English is. It can be outdoor dining or whatnot, but that I think the goal of those zones really has been less intense fill, which is why they're MU2. And that they blend a little bit better with the residential neighborhood that they're found in. And most of them were residential homes at some point, and maybe some of them have been modified to in look to maybe not resemble that as much. There's one on 11th East right by my house where that's been modified enough that it's kind of strange. But I think that's a good thing to have them have a little bit of a setback, so they kind of conform with that feel. And it makes them, I think that achieves a lot of what we do, but that's my feeling. And then I guess one of my last questions is, if the RMU 35 is scattered you just said it's smattered kind of around different areas, then why are we including it in MU3 if we have a competing interest and they're not necessarily concentrated in certain areas? So why is MU3 the best place for an RMU 35 to be consolidated? And maybe it is and maybe it's not, but I think that's the question for me, to then really understand, like, is that where it belongs? Because do we want to reprioritize RMU 35 to be more commercial than what it is now? And does that make sense where it exists? Do we have a map of where all the RMU 35 is found?
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
and I think that would be nice to know in the future, to see if that MU3 is really where it might fit the best.
Yeah, that RMU 35 district, if I just jump in, is it's the best fit really is that MU3 based on scale, the allowed scale of buildings. In fact, it even allows taller buildings than the CB district, up to 45 feet under design review. So it is a challenging district to sort of put into a specific box, if that makes sense.
I think you might then address some of the competing challenges in that in the design standards when you write them. So I think you can handle it that way.
Thanks.
Do any of these include minimum building heights? And when you do this, does this just mean that every place that's RB right now on the map will just change to MU2? It's not on a case by case. If we change it and they want it changed to something else, then they'll have to do a rezoning request. Yeah.
Yes.
So my sense of this is that the MU2s are kind of, as Commissioner Berry was saying, scattered. They're sort of occurring in older neighborhoods where it used to be more of a thing to build commercial. So I have a question about that. But the MU3 is really, I mean, if it's sort of an RMF 35, I mean, we really want to see it in districts. It's not going to be scattered in low-scale neighborhoods, right? So really, it really does still need to emphasize residential as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it really needs to, maybe a little office here and there, but basically it's going to be residential.
Mhm. And I guess I didn't make that totally clear. You know, we're requiring the commercial in those specific locations, and those generally are CB districts. Outside of that, you'll have multifamily row houses and then allowed single family, two family to continue. But there's a row house building form requirement as well, or a form available as well in those areas to establish that residential
The CB
space.
district now is like strip shopping centers and grocery stores, and so we're changing that all to RMF 30 or to MU3. Right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so we're expecting all of this to be substantial redevelopment. In some cases, it's going to be a substantial redevelopment, but people can maintain their strip shopping center if what?
If they,
Don't build it over again.
yeah.
If it didn't, so they just use it until it falls down, and then they have to make it an MU3.
Well, conditional use, like if it becomes dilapidated, then they could
Rebuild it.
maintain it on a, what is it called?
Non-conforming, non-complying.
So, yeah, non-conforming, use. So
Yep.
that would be the time to do it. Yeah.
So things like grocery stores, which typically are one story. So are we requiring if we're not requiring a minimum height in this area in the MU3 or no?
No, we're not. There's no minimum height.
So the thing that we're requiring is that they have some kind of urbanity to them. No
Yes.
more big strip shopping centers with stuff in the front, with parking in the front.
Yeah, and that's where we're sort of crafting that carve-out piece where right now what we have in there is expansions would be allowed for these retail over 10,000 square feet grocery stores.
Well, that would include big boxes too, though.
Yeah, it would include like the Walmart up in Foothill, Walmart. But the expansions that are not within 15 feet of a street would be able to just expand. But if they're within that 15 feet of the street, they need to have that.
Would we be better off
urbanity.
having an entirely different zone for those kinds of places? I mean, okay, we're all trying to consolidate, but at some point you're trying to put a lot of special rules around particular uses and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just concerned that, we may want to say, okay, here is the 4 places in the city where you can build a big box store and you can have a grocery store and you can have gas stations.
Well, one of the things that, if you look at the entirety of the MU flight of districts, there will be accommodations for all of those bigger uses. And so it may be that once we get this in place, that some properties will clearly be, should be zoned something else. And so one of the things that the city council has asked us to do is to consider expanding where mixed use zoning could be applied in the future. So the idea is that let's get the rules in place, then it makes it a lot more clear when we're analyzing those properties to figure out what they should be zoned, if they're zoned appropriately.
Right, and I think that makes a lot of sense, but I don't necessarily want to bend the rules into pretzels just so we can accommodate these 2 or 3 uses that are always going to, at this point in time, are going to be weird.
I don't think we are gonna bend the rules. I mean, we'll have some things that help us administer it for those situations, and that's the goal. So.
The other question I have about the sort of scattered commercial spaces is whether or not a person could come in and request that zoning change in an existing. Well, I used to live in an R17000 district, and that's going to be liberalized somewhat, so we have some more potential for additional units and so forth. But there's been a house on a corner there that has been vacant for 25 years. A brand new house, nobody ever moved into it because it's super ugly. And so could someone who had a house like that come in and say, oh, I want this to be rezoned to MU2?
I mean, like any rezoning, there's the factors need to be considered. Is it appropriate?
Sure.
But actually, many years ago, which not that many, just before I was at the city identified a whole slew of those small neighborhood business spots, those non-complying buildings that used to be corner groceries and things, and developed the SMB as that district to be the, if you have one of these properties, it should be fairly easy to rezone to that, and the MU2 would still function as that district. So if someone has a house with a corner grocery and they want that commercial use, they probably have a good enough case if they came in and said, I want to open, I don't know, a small shop, a pie shop, a record, something. Wines, well, state law might make that difficult, but
Just a coffee shop with a wine bar in the basement. I had so many fantasies about this vacant house.
but they would be able to use the MU2 for that, but again, it would have to be appropriate for that context.
But if an MU, that means that it has to be the same facade, and you hate that house, so you don't want to look like that.
I do, but it would be better with a sign on it. Sorry.
So what
It's
happened?
just,
No, so you're good. What happened to those? I believe it was the MU2. That MU2 that had the parking in the back. Like, are all of them kind of like meeting that standard, or do you foresee this to be a challenge? Because I know some properties have their parking on the side, on the front.
I mean, the MU2 probably more likely to be conforming to that.
Yeah.
But in the MU3 with that CB district, you have the grocery stores with those massive parking lots in the front, and that's these requirements are for new construction, for new buildings. If they want to put in new parking, then it would have to comply. But that's
You talk about some of the competing interests, but also I'm curious to know like what developers are saying about this, specifically the MU3. Like, are there any like concerns about the housing priorities and the need with some sort of like form-based code? Is it helping or is it not? Is it a challenge for them?
so for these districts specifically, you're one of the first to get a peek at it, to see what we're working on. There will be a more robust engagement process with those with developers, with community councils and things. So right now, specifically to these districts, we're not there yet, but mixed use in general, I can't really say. I don't have the high level view. I'm reviewing petitions on a case by case basis, and we see the challenge of getting developers to put that commercial element in their new developments.
So many examples just in 400, which you think that it's 400 South is. Anyways, I guess what I was going with this is I'm curious to hear that, just because in the best case scenario, I want to think that there is mixed use and there's activated retail with the set backs with amenities in the front and like I don't know, a garden. But I wonder if somehow that's going to be a challenge to developers to create more housing, just because of the structure and the envelope of the building that already exists. and whether or not we're like making it impossible for them to make more density available for us. I guess that's what my thought process was with that, and I think that's it.
So with these two districts, they really don't cover a lot of square feet in the city. And a lot of them are already existing neighborhood commercial areas, with some exception of some RMU 35 areas and just a small handful of RB properties. I was getting to your point. We recently had the downtown building height amendment, and a lot of things changed where we started requiring active ground floor uses in our design standards. That was sort of added into there. And that process, developing that code, took a long time to push harder for the mixed use. And I can't say what's going on now, but that was distributed to developers and things to review and provide feedback on as well. So it's still out there, but we still don't know what the outcome is or the opinion is, but it's been implemented in some places. These other MU districts, a lot of them are going to be incorporating things that already exist, that are already in place. For like the FBUN2 district or the MU8 district that you looked at and that was recently passed, things like that.
A couple of just like procedural things as we're going through these briefings. I know that because it's going so fast, we can't get stuff beforehand. Would it be possible for us to just get like a map that shows every, RB, CN, and SNB if we're going to be looking at MU2 that day? I think if we could get that beforehand, that would be really helpful for me, because then I can kind of have a sense of what we're talking about. And also, if can we get these proposals like put in Dropbox afterwards, so that we can go back through them? That would be helpful for me, at least, because it takes me a while to parse through them and understand.
So I'm going to comment on those two things really quick.
Yeah.
Is that our intention is that starting sometime in June, everything that you see that will also be available to the public on our website. So this project will have a specific website where we are going to put everything.
Okay.
So we'll have a comparison between the zones, the zoning, how the zoning map would change. The idea is someone could click on a property and it'll bring up a side-by-side comparison so they can see what the differences are. And so absolutely, as we get more into the depth of this,
Okay, if that's just coming later, that's
yeah. And as we come back, we're going to keep doing these kind of introductory briefings. We'll make sure that we're including the maps and stuff so you can see where these apply, because that is a big part of the story, especially with these smaller districts that are scattered all over the city. So
cool. Yeah, I think
definitely
that
will provide
the map thing was more the big thing, is that it would help me know what areas we're talking about. Because some of like how CN is very kind of specific. And then one question I had, just kind of as a general thought, is in how land uses are getting agglomerated as this goes, because I think one of the nice things in the CN district, which is one that I've worked in a couple of times, is that there's a thing in there about like land uses being approved if they have community benefit, right? So it's like allows for small things that actually people around there will use. So if it's a yoga studio or whatever. But I've seen projects where people wanted to put in an office for like 60 people, and that's not benefiting the people around them, and so it wasn't. So I do wonder how those get kind of, as those get mashed up together, what the best way to deal with that is. And then, what was the other thing? If I remember, I'll come back.
And yeah, we'll have more discussions, especially about that land use needs its own presentation.
Oh, in terms of the setbacks, I actually lean more towards small setbacks, just because I think it's important to differentiate between places that are being repurposed into businesses, like small houses. This is MU2 specific, and new construction, because I don't think it makes sense to kind of, if we're doing new construction, make it look like a house and then have a business in it so that it fits the neighborhood. I think it's better to have it be a business that fits the neighborhood, and that often that'll be more kind of a street facing facade. One thing in how that kind of pairs with parking though is having deeper step backs like that will also can be kind of a cost prohibitive sometimes for developers because lots are so small and skinny in these areas. Oftentimes they're basically just the width of a house, so they can be 25 feet or whatever. And so I do wonder about the best way to accommodate parking and how we account for street parking and for the neighborhood overall and things like that. And maybe if places do have parking behind them, then the facade is more pushed out. And if it's a lot where they don't have the width to do that, maybe then the building is more pushed back and you kind of create a little patio area just so that the building shifts so that the extra space is of most benefit to the public, whether that's in getting parking behind the building or in creating kind of outdoor plazas out front. And then the other thing was it won't be an issue immediately on changing stuff, but another thing that is I think beneficial to some of the smaller like CN and RB districts is that they have like a maximum square footage for the entire area. So like it's a CN district can't be contiguously more than, I don't know what it is, like 70,000 square feet or something. But it prevents those nodes from expanding all the way and then kind of creating blocked off areas, which would turn like, 9th East. If everything keeps spreading that way, eventually it gets down to 13th, and it kind of creates these blocked out areas of commercial all along that corridor. So I do think that there's some benefit in some way containing those smaller districts so that they don't all just grow and kind of merge together, and then you get kind of amoebas of residential and so.
Gotcha. Yeah, they do currently have those, and that's not in our proposal. So I'll take note of that.
So in earlier you mentioned, do we let grocery stores freely expand? Do you mean like freely expand the building footprint, or yeah?
Yeah, if they expand the building footprint without additional design elements, whether that's close to the street or not, or do we require them to have urban elements if they want to expand near the street, or just for any sort of expansion, do we want to just hold them to the same design standards as anyone else? And that's challenging, especially with the way the buildings are constructed.
My impulse is to decrease regulations on that kind of thing. Allowing more freedom to expand into parking lots seems like a good thing. Removing hoops that people have to jump through to remove their front parking lots seems positive to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my input.
So I wonder if that would be the same for if it were just a grocery store, but if it's Target or Walmart that has grocery component and then all this other stuff, do we only allow the grocery component to expand freely? Or do we allow all of it? Because they sell cereal in some aisle. And so then we're like, yeah, expand freely how you want. So I think there's some nuances there that we would want to consider.
Yeah, and I think that would be, I definitely 100% agree with you. I think adding to that, like on smaller scale grocery stores, like corner grocery stores, that kind of thing, let them expand. But like if it's like a place that has a massive parking lot that's the size of a football stadium, then that would potentially be in a different zoning district, and so that would need different regulations, of course.
M1.
But that's a very good point.
Well, I think that
Thank you.
I have one
one
announcement
more.
then. I just wanted to let other commissioners know that on Plan Edison, the courses, there was some really good ones on form-based code. If you want to log in there and actually listen to those, or you could probably, I benefited, and maybe you could too, but I just wanted to alert you that they're there.
I happened to watch one of those today. So, yeah, with that, let's go ahead and wrap up. And a reminder that we will be choosing a new chair next time. So keep that in mind.
Who's most at risk for coronavirus? People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk?